Just a brief word of introduction for our speakers this morning, who really need no introduction, but for the sake of, if you're completely new to international ministries and you've never heard of a global servant before, the different levels of service within our international ministries for the American Baptist Foreign Mission Society are the global servant, the regional consultant, and the global consultant. And I think it's fair to say that our speakers have worked in each of those levels. They're classified as regional consultants with responsibilities in Goma in the Democratic Republic of the Congo, but I know that you will be delighted to hear from them this morning. I had the opportunity to hear them most recently at this summer's World Mission Conference, which was held in Green Lake, Wisconsin, and it was an immersive experience. It was wonderful to me to hear about stories of testimony about how God is working in different parts of the world. So I hope that you will have an open ear as you listen to what God is up to. Anne and Bill Clemmer reside in the Democratic Republic of the Congo on the Congo-Rwanda border, where they serve as career mission workers, serving with partners Heal Africa and IMA World Health in the town of Goma. Bill provides support to healthcare workers, hospitals, and clinics that provide life-saving maternal and child health services, while Anne supports educational and relief assistance to orphans and vulnerable children. And you can read some of their newsletters on our missions board in the hallway. The Clemmers began their service with the International Ministries in January of 1993, and they've served in the Congo, in South Sudan when it was the world's newest country, and in Haiti with interim assignments in Somalia, Yemen, Burundi, and other countries to meet urgent and short-term needs. They returned back to Cape Cod, where Bill grew up and attended school at Dennis Yarmouth Regional High School, and to Brewster Baptist Church, which they last visited a decade ago, to share about today how good and faithful God has been throughout their ongoing work. They recently completed 30 years of service overseas, and now they're home for the holidays to be with their children and extended family before a planned return to Africa at the end of this month or close to the beginning of next month. And so we are delighted that you're here, that we can afford you a night or two in our Brewster Baptist Church guest house, and I'd love to invite you up now to share. Please give them a warm welcome.
Good morning. It's a pleasure to be here, and actually it's my first time ever to come to Brewster Baptist, and I just want to thank you for the warm welcome. And to tell the story of what God's done, it would take so long. I mean, God is so good. But when I first started, well, actually 50 years ago, I was a high school teacher. And I love teaching high school. I love kids of that age. I love working with youth. But not long after God called Bill and I married, he'll tell that story. And we went on the mission field. We started in Haiti. We had 3 young children, and I was the director of the Christian Mission School. So I didn't work with young people so much. I worked more in administration. And God has been putting me in these positions that I haven't trained for, I haven't prepared for, but he has given me the gifts and the skills to be able to do it. And then we moved from Haiti, we moved to the interior of the Congo, Zaire back then, and I homeschooled our own children, and then I also taught English, ESL, to medical residents. And then we ended up back in Kinshasa in the Congo, where I was on the school board of the Christian Mission School, and then eventually to South Sudan. And every time we have moved to a new place, it was because Bill had a job offer, or Bill had something that God wanted him to do, and I had to find my own place. When we went to South Sudan, I had no idea what I would do there, and Mission Aviation Fellowship was just across the road from where we lived, and they had a huge need for a Christian school, so one of the missionaries with MAF and I started the first Christian school in Juba. And I taught preschool. I taught little 3- and 4-year-olds, which was great, but I have a passion for young people. So then we moved to Goma in 2016. And again, I had no idea what I was going to do, but one day after church, Heal Africa is a hospital, but it's also a social ministries and a church. In fact, when the volcanic eruption destroyed the entire city of Goma in 2002, Heal Africa, the first thing they built back was the church. And I met with there were 12 Sunday school teachers, and they said, please pray with us, because the Sunday school children were meeting outside in the open air in the parking lot. And they said, we want God to give us a tent. And so we prayed, and God has given us this huge Sunday school complex. And we have about 850 Sunday school children come every Sunday morning. They walk, we're right on the equator, so the sun rises at 6 and it sets at 6. So these children get up at the break of dawn. Some of them walk more than an hour with their baby siblings on their backs to come to Sunday school. We had Sunday school on the Sunday mornings, and then we had this huge facility and wanted to figure out what God would have us do with the facility. So in Congo, you can't go to school if you don't have money to pay school fees. So there are many, many children who are not able to go to school. In fact, over 50% of the children in Congo are under the age of 17. So, 50% of the population. So it's a very, very young population. Many children don't have any opportunities of education or school. So every day during the week, we've opened it up and we've added classes. We teach English, we teach reading for those who've never learned to read. We have music theory, we teach musical instruments, we have choir, we have dance teams, which is a real joy. We teach leadership and any number of things. Even since we've been back in the last month, they've added 2 classes, one of those being a photography class. We sent one of our young people to learn photography, and he in turn has come around, and he has 30 other young people who want to learn to take pictures, and he teaches them. And then the parents wanted to get involved as well, and we began opening the doors for the parents in the afternoons, and we have parenting classes, we have rotating credit programs, and we do training to help them start small businesses to be able to support their families. Our church also has attracted a large group of widows, so we have Goat Project, where we gave out 75 goats 3 years ago, and after 9 months, the mother goats were given to another 75 ladies and so forth, because God's in the business of multiplication. And the widows also have a lot of training and work and income generating. Many of these widows have taken in children that are not of their own, but of their extended family, and they'll have 8, 9, 10, 12 children living in their home. But just what's given me the greatest joy of being in Goma is that I'm ending up where I began, with the passion that I have for young people. We have 60 Sunday school teachers between the ages of 14 and 24. And life is very hard in Goma. I wrote a newsletter several years ago about how Goma, it seems to me, is the city of Jobs. They keep suffering. It's a lawless area because we're far away from the capital cities. So ever since the Rwandan genocide in 1994, where the perpetrators escaped from Rwanda into Congo, they've been roaming, and there are many, many different militia groups, armed groups, and Congo has basically been, this part of Congo has been at war since 1994. Life is difficult. There's always the threat of attacks. As I said, many don't have the opportunity to go to school. Very few of the young people have jobs, but they live for the promise. We have volcanic eruptions periodically. Our last one was in 2021. But even those disasters have opened doors to serve. And after the volcano, we were able to provide food for those who had been homeless from the volcano. We also have had very large, serious Ebola epidemics. And, but I says, for the young people, they're there every day of the week. They live in homes. A lot of the homes are built on the hardened lava. They have lava floors. There'll be 2 or 3 rooms with groups of large families. Some of them don't even have doors. They don't have running water. They don't have electricity. But they have joy. They come to church and they're together and they're fellowshipping and they're serving God. And it's just such a blessing to me to be a part of that. The promise of the gospel gives them hope. Hebrews 10 talks about how they look for a city which is built by God. And they do. They don't live for the present. They live to build the future of what God has for them. And God keeps opening doors. We just started a new program after the volcanic eruption in 2021. We started to see a lot of children come to Sunday school who were in tattered clothes, barefoot, hungry, sores. And these children were living on the street. Goma has over 2,000 children who live on the street between the ages of about 5 and 15 who are homeless. And it touched the hearts of our Sunday school teachers. And they said, every time they say, Mama Ann, we need to do something. And God's prompting them to open their doors and open their hearts to serve. And so we started a street children ministry. As I said, we had this huge complex, but every room was filled every day of the week except for Saturday mornings. So Saturday mornings we began taking in these children at 6 o'clock, right when the sun came up, so they could shower, they could hear the Bible stories, they could learn that God loves them, have counseling, a good meal of rice and beans before they went back to the streets at noon on Saturdays. And then the Sunday school teachers came and they said, Mama, we got to do something because they're only here one day a week and they have so many needs. So we weren't sure what God was going to do, but he's faithful. I received a letter from a man who we had never met, and he said, if you had a dream, what would it be? So our dream is to be able to have full-time programs for these precious children. And he said, well, what would it take? And a building, and how much would that be? And he wrote a check. And we just completed the building about a year ago. And we started full-time ministry to these children during the daylight hours. And if you could see them as they come, they're really rough around the edges. But after a few weeks, as they start to change, and we've already been able to get 20 of these children back into their own homes. And to hear them give their testimonies is such a joy. And then just before I left, they said, Mama, these children, when they leave our program in the afternoon, they go out on the street. They have no warm clothes. They have nothing but their clothes on their back. And they have rice sacks. A rice sack is just a large bag. And they tuck them and hide them in places in the city. And then when the afternoon is over, they'll go and find their rice sack, and that's how they sleep at night. Often they don't sleep well because the police will chase them away, or older street children will come and harass them. And they'll come every morning and sit in church. We have church 3 times a week, beginning at 7 o'clock, and they'll dance and have joy when the singing's going on. But when the sermon comes, they fall asleep in their chairs. They're just exhausted. And so we were thinking about what we could do for them to keep them safe at night. And God has just provided a house that we're hoping to renovate that will open it up for them for the nighttime hours. But so God's just brought me full circle. And in the interim, he's been using that time to give me things to do that have prepared me for what we're doing now. And he keeps opening doors, and what a joy it is to be able to be there and work with these young people. I just turned 70 in December. Never dreamed that we'd still be on the mission field, but how can you not walk through those doors when God says he has work to do? No, I'll turn it over to Bill.
Good morning. It is so nice to be here, and it is so difficult to keep up with Ann Clemmer. I actually have a pretty easy job. I just work in a hospital and healthcare facilities. I just care for people. I've been doing the same thing for 30 plus years. But Ann, you amaze me, and it has been such a wonderful journey. It's great to be back on the Cape. I don't spend a lot of time here, as you may have read in the bulletin. It is true. I actually grew up here. I went to school. I graduated from DY in 1975, 48 years ago. Finished school. I went to Boston College, and when I graduated from college, all I wanted to do was just leave the Cape. I didn't want to be here. I'm not sure, brokenhearted or broken spirit. I just wanted to leave. The Cape then wasn't what it is today. Maybe I would have wanted to have left earlier. So I joined the Peace Corps at the age of 22. I wanted to see the world. I wanted to do something different with my life. And the Peace Corps sent me to a country called Mali. Mali is a Muslim country in North Africa. I landed in Bamako, where I had 6 weeks of language school. And then I traveled up the Niger River by boat to the last outpost on the Sahara Desert, a town called Gao Mali on the Sahara Desert, where I was to teach high school mathematics, physics, and chemistry and French. It was an exciting job for a young man from the Cape. Sand dunes and camels and palm trees, and I had about 60 to 70 students in each class. They were named Mamadou and Idrissa and Abdul and Fatimata, and they were laughed at my Cape Cod accent, speaking French high school. But it was a wonderful job, and I loved it. I loved everything about being in Africa at the age of 22. But I was the only one of my culture, no one to speak English with, and I lived in a little teacher house. It was a mud brick house, which was nice to have during the day, especially when the temperature got up to 120 and 130. But at night, those homes were like ovens. So I used to sleep up on my flat roof. I had a little mattress that I carried there. In the afternoon, when all my students went home, I used to sit in the sand dunes, and I had all kinds of time to think and to reflect, and spent long nights. There wasn't a lot to do after 4 or 5 p.m. in the desert. When I was traveling to Africa, a friend gave me a copy of the Bible, which I frankly had never read. And I read about how our salvation is predicated not upon what we could do, which I thought actually growing up, that at the end of my life, if my good deeds outweighed my bad deeds, then I'd end up at a good place. And I read in the Bible that if we confess with our lips that Jesus is Lord and believe in our heart that God raised him from the dead, we will be saved. Nothing in there about service or working, and life-changing words. And at the age of 22 in the Sahara Desert, this young man from Cape Cod gave his life to the Lord. I became born again, as Jesus said to Nicodemus. There was a significant change in how I thought, but I was still alone in the desert. Peace Corps usually sends people out in 2s or 3s. They usually don't send you out. I was actually supposed to be assigned with a gentleman from California who had to go home, and they were going to send a young man from Brooklyn to Brooklyn, New York, to be with me my second year. Imagine a Red Sox fan and a Yankee fan in the desert. Didn't matter. I wanted company. And so in the summer prior to the school year, Peace Corps sent not Mr. Bob from Brooklyn, but a long, blonde-haired, blue-eyed woman from South Carolina to the Sahara Desert. Miss Ann was also a new believer, recently had come to know Jesus as her Lord and Savior through the ministry of the Campus Crusade for Christ. Imagine that. A homely guy from Cape Cod in the Sahara Desert with a beautiful woman from South Carolina. I remember thinking, if this is what's going to be like to be a believer, I'm in. And we, during the course of our time in Africa, I can't explain it, we both had a strong, strong calling that we wanted to come back. My vision in life, when I finished my term in Peace Corps, I was going to teach mathematics at a high school in Massachusetts. But we had a strong, distinct calling that God wanted us to come back as missionaries. I didn't know what that meant. I just knew that I wanted to devote my life to the work and what God had given me. I had a dream about becoming a missionary doctor. Well, that was pretty much what I hadn't trained for, but that was what God distinctly kept calling, Bill, I want you to come back. I want you to come back as a doctor. Thankfully, God did not ask me to come back as a pastor or a preacher. Joe and Douglas, I could not have done that. But that was my passion. When we left the U.S., when we left Africa, I came to the U.S., applied to medical school, get into several schools. Ann and I married. I went to medical school in Washington, D.C., 3 years residency. And at the end of my residency, that calling was there still. But I wanted to be a doctor in the United States before spending my career in Africa. So when we finished our residency, we moved to the state of New Hampshire, where I was an ER doctor in the White Mountains of New Hampshire. By that time, we were married. We had two children, one on the way, and it was a wonderful place to practice medicine. I was an ER doctor. We bought this big old Victorian home on a hill, looking over the White Mountains. I loved my job. I loved New Hampshire. I loved the life. I used to teach my kids to go skiing, and I would cross-country ski. The third child came, and I didn't listen to the calling. I began to say, God, did we really mean that we were going to come back to Africa? Or, Lord, wouldn't it make sense for me to become experienced? Maybe I'll come when I'm 60. And God sort of put up with that foolishness, and one day we received a letter from International Ministries in Philadelphia. They had heard about this young doctor who had made a promise years ago to come back to Africa, and they invited Ann and I to come visit them in Philadelphia. And I figured, let's put this thing to rest. So we accepted the invite, got on the train. We took the train from White River Junction in Vermont all the way to Philadelphia and met with the mission board of the American Baptist Foreign Mission Society. And they needed a doctor in Africa, and they showed us pictures of the children and the diseases of the hospital. And, I was like, and then they said, we really, really need someone of your caliber. They offered us a salary of $24,000, which was $12,000 each. I couldn't even pay my car payment, let alone my mortgage. And I was, we were very, very polite, and thank you so much. And they took us out to dinner that night. And the next morning, I couldn't wait to get on the train back to White River Junction, sort of like Jonas escaping Nineveh. And we boarded that train, and the only thing on my mind was getting back to New Hampshire. I was on duty that night, thank you very much. And we reached the border of Vermont. It was getting dark. There was a snowstorm. In the middle of Vermont, in the forest and the Green Mountains, that train broke down. We had a little cabin, not many people on the train, and it was cold. This was in February of 1992. It was dark. Everything broke down, and the conductor said, we don't know what happened, but we're going to be here for a while. And so Ann and I were in this dark train cabin. We sort of, looked at each other. And we had promised the mission board that, yes, you will pray about this decision. You always say that, don't you? But we had nothing to do. And we got on our knees and prayed. And after about, Ann, 20, 30 minutes, we got up and we looked in each other's eyes. And we knew that calling 10 years ago was as true then as it was today. We got back home. I wrote a letter of resignation from my job. We put our home on the market, brought the car back to the dealer, found out Ann was pregnant with our fourth child, and went overseas. As Joe mentioned, 30 years ago, January 4th, 1993. And it has been a wonderful journey. I can't believe I almost missed what God had prepared for us in advance. But it's good that God doesn't always let you know about the things that might come, the volcanoes and Ebola, and when our children get sick, and I was the only doctor. That was stressful, and all the fighting and the conflict in Yemen and Somalia and Congo. But there were blessings beyond any of that. Imagine raising 4 children in the middle of a lush rainforest, homeschooling, no devices, no internet, no electricity, no after-school activities. You always knew where your kids were. Long nights playing games by kerosene lamps. What a wonderful place to grow up, a marriage and a family. And what a place to use the talents that God had given us. I learned that that despite all the trauma and all the problems, it was in 1997, I think just prior to when I came here, during the middle of the Congolese War, our hospital was actually attacked. We had, fortunately, many of the doctors and nurses and Ann and the kids had left, and I was behind rebel lines and ended up getting caught. And Ann didn't know where I was, and I was taken in and tried, and we were actually arrested. And Ann was able to make it out of the country. There was no communication, and our mission board wanted Ann to come home to the United States when they hadn't heard from me with the 4 kids, and Ann said, "I'm not leaving the continent without my husband." Would you say the same thing to me today? And 11 months later, I was let go, and we were rejoined. And what I learned is the safest place for any of us is in the will of God. And what I wanted to share briefly this morning, and I'll be brief, the other wonderful thing about using God's is the other wonderful thing about using the talents that God has basically given us is the opportunity to make a difference for the kingdom. I love the story in 2 Corinthians when Paul talks about how we all, when we come to know Jesus as our Lord and Savior, we have this foundation of faith that nobody can ever take away from us. And God gives us the ability during our lives to build upon that foundation. Some build with gold, some with silver, some with bronze, some with wood, some with hay, and some with straw. And God clearly says at the end of our life, we all will go through this refinement of fire, and everything foolishness that we bought, that we built, everything self-serving, all of our things, our cars and our Victorians in New Hampshire and other things and our worries, those will all be burned away. The only thing that will be left is that which we have done for the kingdom. Paul said that some of us will escape that fire with only the clothes on our back. Ladies and gentlemen, God has done so much for us. I don't want to come to the kingdom with just the clothes on my back. And so we are thankful for the opportunities that God has given us for 30 years. Pastor Doug preached a sermon last Sunday on life is not fair. He talked about Moses. Moses, for 40 years, led the children of Israel through the desert to go to the promised land, and when he got to the Jordan River, or basically where he could see it, his life was taken away, and Moses was never able to enter the promised land. He talked about Dr. Martin Luther King, who gave his life for civil rights. Martin Luther King talked about, I have climbed the mountain, I have seen those promises, but they're far away in the distance. In 2022, I spent more than half of the year in countries like Yemen. Yemen is a country in the Middle East, which is currently under attack by Islamic-based fundamentalists in the north. I was in the south working with the government trying to establish healthcare facilities. There were 3 million refugees in the middle of Yemen, and we have camps and we have healthcare facilities that care for them. I was just reading that the UN says that in 2023, over 300,000 children are at risk of dying from starvation, not from malaria or schistosomiasis or things that I've learned how to treat. 300,000 children at risk this year of dying from starvation. A sharp fact for me when we come home. Life is not fair. But some could say that neither is Christianity, or neither is salvation. How is it that this broken vessel from Cape Cod can boldly say, if I confess with my lips that Jesus is Lord and believe in my heart that he will come again, I will be saved? I am so glad I will be judged not upon fairness. I don't want fairness. I want grace. For it is by grace we are saved through faith. We thank Brewster Baptist Church for being a beacon of faith and hope. Lastly, as a medical doctor, I see what I've seen so much in the past 30 years is so much death and dying. Nothing like I did when I practiced medicine in the White Mountains of New Hampshire. So many children have died on my watch, and dear women and men. And it dawns upon me that that death can be as close to us as the back of our hand. Ann and I are driving back to Maine on Monday. Death could be at the other end. We're flying back to the Congo February 2nd. We never know. But what we do know is that God will be there. In 2021, in 2020, we had Congo basically experienced its worst outbreak of the Ebola virus in history. I was assigned to the hot zone. I actually volunteered for 3 months and ended up being there for 18 months, 3,500 deaths. During that time, People, because of the disease and because of the level of contagiousness, people would basically shut themselves up in their homes. Schools would be closed, churches would be closed, markets would be closed. Mothers would not let their children go out into the streets. They would be locked in their home. And I met this 86-year-old pastor, this African pastor, Pastor David, who was in a church all by himself there in case people came, so he could minister to them, be them, and be their comfort. A very feeble 86-year-old, which is old in the Congo, pastor. And I said, Pastor David, my friend, you're 86 years old. The church is empty. Don't you think you've done your duty? Isn't it time to go home? And he looked at me. He said, Dr. Bill. They call me Dr. Bill. Dr. Bill, didn't you know that Jesus is coming? And when Jesus comes, I want him to find me in the field, in the garden that he prepared for me. And I don't know when the day will come when the Lord calls us home. But I do know that I will come through that fire, that I will bring something to the Lord. But my prayer is that of 2 Timothy, that the words that I want to echo when I come to the door is, Lord, I have fought the good fight. I have finished the race. I have kept the faith. In Brewster Baptist Church, you are a light to the Lord on Cape Cod. You are fighting the fight for morality and for what's right. You are persevering in the faith. And you are a beacon of light to Cape Cod. Thank you so much for your love and support for missions globally, for the work that you do on Cape Cod, for your prayers for Ann and I over 30 years. May the Lord bless you for all you have done and give you hope for the future. God bless you, and thank you so much.